At the time of this story, I was 21 and living in a major Midwestern city, attending the university there. Having lived there for only 1 month before my story began, I had witnessed a train stop stabbing, been yelled at by a crackhead, had a homeless guy follow me and threaten to choke me outside the physics building on campus, and watched a 13-car cop raid on a drug house just across the street. Needless to say, the area around the university is known for being quite rough and has a notoriously high rate of crime. We would get a few texts a week from the campus police, saying things like there had been a robbery, a break-in, an assault, some stalkings, even an attempted kidnapping here and there. I always ignored these texts though, thinking foolishly that I would never be a victim because I was smart enough to stay out of trouble. You know, not go out alone late at night, all the cliches. I seriously regret this behavior now, and to anyone listening to this, please never think you're 100% safe, no matter your level of preparedness. Always do your best to stay observant and careful. The first incident wasn't too unusual. I was just a block or two from my apartment building one day, in the early evening. It was still light outside even. I was walking my dog Sesame, a cute Shiba Inu who looks just like a fluffy, goofy puppy, and has never been frightening or particularly protective in his life. As I was heading back home, I passed a small parking lot, and in it a large van. I could see a man in his early 60s or so, sitting in the driver's seat and smoking a cigarette. He was staring at me. As I passed, he actually leaned out of his car and called out to me, "Hey, you there. That's a cute dog. What's his name?" I should mention that this isn't even my first story like this. I have a pretty intense fear of strangers and actually struggle with PTSD from other incidents in my life. Being pretty wary for this reason, I just ignored him and walked on faster. I heard a car door shut behind me though, and turned quickly to see he had gotten out of his van and was now slowly walking toward me. He called out to me again. "Hey baby, I just want to see your dog, come back." His phrasing pissed me off, and I gripped my dog's leash and started to speed walk away from him, starting to feel a bit nervous. My heart was beginning to pound, but I kept telling myself over and over that I was overreacting. It was just my paranoia acting up, and there was nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. I managed to turn the corner and was about to cross the final park before getting to my apartment. In my fear over the van guy, I wasn't paying as much attention as I usually would to what was in front of me. I looked back over my shoulder, and the guy had stopped following me. He was, however, standing right in the middle of the sidewalk with this huge, creepy grin on his face. I whirled back around with my eyes glued to my building. I only needed to walk another half block and I'd be home. I was going to get away from him and his creepy van. Just when I thought I was safe, though, a group of 5 or 6 men came from the side of the park I wasn't watching. They were all tall and intimidating in stature, and all of them were laughing and looking right at me. Out of the corner of my eye, the van guy had now started walking towards me as well. I remember he was whistling. I again picked up my pace and desperately searched for my keys in my pocket as I hurried to the door. The group of men veered toward me, partially cutting me off, and in my stupid politeness I stopped. They grinned at me with sick perverted smiles, obviously checking me out, looking up and down my body. It made me sick. I tried not to panic and inched closer to my apartment. "Hey, what's your name? Where you going? What's your Snapchat? Is that your apartment right there? Can we come over? Do you smoke?" They all barraged me with questions one after the other. I tried to refuse them, stammering, "No thank you." I saw the van guy then come and join their group as well, leering at me with them. While I inched away, they inched closer. One of them then reached out for me, his fingers actually touching my arm. I leapt back, trying not to start crying, but Sesame suddenly lunged at them, his teeth bared and a horrifying snarl ripping from his throat. Every single bit of that cute Shiba personality was gone. He looked like he wanted to tear these guys' throats out. I guess it startled them enough that I was able to turn around and sprint the final distance to my building, locking the door behind me. I fell to the floor inside, hugging Sesame tight. However, the entire front of my building was glass. To my horror and disbelief, the group of men came and stood in front of the windows, grinning at me, laughing, making kissy faces and lewd gestures at me. The apartment manager came out and called the cops on them, but they ran away once they heard they were coming. I made it back home and scrubbed myself in the shower, crying and shaking in fear. Sesame got a special dinner that evening, and I kept telling myself they just wanted to mess with me, and I was never in any real danger. Stupid of me, I now know. About a month later, when I had finally managed to be able to walk outside my apartment without severe anxiety, I was actually planning on moving a bit farther away from campus. It was still going to be in a somewhat sketchy neighborhood, but the thought of those men knowing where I lived kept me up at night. My apartment had actually hired a security guard to be there 24/7 after someone had broken into the building, smashed all the windows, destroyed the furniture, and stolen a bunch of bikes. Of course, my bike got stolen that time as well. Anyway, I was heading home from class and it was a beautiful day. I actually felt pretty happy for once and popped in my earbuds on the last few blocks home. After a block or so though, I started to feel like someone was watching me. My palms started sweating. I glanced behind me, trying not to look obvious, only to see a tall man about 20 feet behind me, staring straight at me. I snapped my head back around and ripped out my earbuds. No, I thought. That can't be one of them. I must be jumping to conclusions, given my anxiety disorder and paranoia, surely. But there was something familiar about him. My heart started racing, as I hoped to God the others weren't waiting for me around the corner of my building, ready to jump me. I started to walk faster, wishing Sesame was with me. I was too afraid to look back at him as I fumbled with my keys and wrenched the door open as hard as I could. This turned out to be a crucial mistake. As I ran to the elevator, trying to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw with absolute horror that the man had caught the door I had thrown wide open and was slowly coming into the building with me. He paused, standing away from me, but close enough I could hear his ragged breathing and the smell of alcohol coming off him. My heart was thudding in my chest now, and I struggled to think clearly. The apartment manager was already home for the day, and I was completely alone in the lobby. There were no other doors out of that room, and the stranger was blocking my way to the escape. The security guard who was supposed to be keeping an eye on the building was nowhere to be seen. The elevator came and I tried to run into it and slam my hand over the door close button as fast as I could. I pushed my floor button and huddled in the far corner of the elevator. I started to once again try to catch my breath, but right when the door was about to close, he stuck his hand in. I couldn't believe it. He waited until the door was just about to close and then stopped it. He was standing close enough that there was no way that was a mistake. My stomach dropped and a suffocating sense of dread crept in. I kept my head down as he joined me. My desperate hope that he was just a dirty, drunken resident of the building was dashed when he didn't press any buttons. I don't know why I didn't run out of the elevator or try to leave the building again. I was paralyzed with fear, and all I could do was watch as the door closed and sealed my fate. The elevator was filled with the stench of alcohol and BO. If I wasn't so terrified, I may have gagged. It was nauseating. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't even move. I tried to scream at myself in my head to press the wrong button and try to escape, but I was completely petrified. He leaned in closer to me, and I heard him breathe in deeply and very quietly sigh like he was content. I felt tears well in my eyes, and the seconds it took to reach the top floor where I lived felt like hours. I saw no way I could escape the sick drunk guy who was smelling me. In the reflection of the elevator walls, I could make out his disgusting smile. He was staring directly at me, his hands in his pockets clearly holding onto something. I'm not religious, but I prayed I would make it to my door in time. I realized he probably wasn't going to attack me in the elevator. There was a large camera in the ceiling. I looked up, feeling a tear spill out of my eye as I did so, hoping that whoever saw the tape would eventually identify this man. The worst part of all of this is that I've trained in martial arts and self-defense since I was about 8 years old. I thought myself as stronger and braver than I was acting. I should know what to do. I should be strong enough to do it. But the truth is, no matter how many times you've disarmed, thrown, or choked out attackers in the studio, nothing will ever prepare you for the real-life situation. As the elevator reached my floor, I managed to snap out of my stupor long enough to dash through the door and run to my apartment unit. I nearly missed the keyhole, but I threw open my door. I was nearly through when my backpack snagged on the outside handle, trapping me in place. I heard the man then leave the elevator and start walking quickly to my door, a low chuckle building in his throat as he watched me panic and struggle to get free. I felt like a mouse being watched by a cat, trapped and helpless, so close to escaping. I finally gave up and shoved my arms through the straps, abandoning my backpack. As I did so, the man suddenly reached out for me. I was able to slam the door in his face though, deadbolting it shut. The gust of air from the door slamming brought his disgusting smell in with me, and my terror and disgust made me retch violently. I looked through the peephole. He was staring right at me, pressing his forehead against the door, his mouth bent in a furious scowl. He swore at me and ripped my backpack off the handle of the door, slamming it to the ground. I winced as I heard my laptop thud. I was still too terrified to say anything, but I grabbed the knife I kept by my door in my hand, ready if he tried anything else. After a few minutes of staring at my door, jiggling the handle, licking the peephole, and making obscene motions at it, he unzipped my backpack, dumping its contents on the floor. He picked up my bag and sniffed it, leering at the peephole as he did so, like he knew I was watching him. I couldn't look away, again paralyzed in fear. Finally, he left, using the elevator visible from my door, like nothing had ever happened. I continued to stare out the peephole for what felt like an eternity, and then finally called the apartment manager, feeling my anger sinking in that the security guard hadn't been anywhere in sight, obviously not paying attention. It turns out he had fallen asleep eating Taco Bell and watching movies on his phone. He had been only 10 feet away from the elevator the entire time, sleeping in the office behind a closed door. They fired him, but the creepy guy was never caught, and neither were any of the others. I don't even know for sure that this man was part of that original group. I was honestly too terrified to look much at their faces during the first incident. I moved out of my apartment a week later, staying with my boyfriend at the time for the remainder of my lease, and keeping Sesame with me at all times when possible. A few more things happened while I lived in that city, from having to call in a gunfight from outside my new apartment window, to having to pick up my friend who was being followed by a van, and having to evacuate during an arson incident. There are nice things about that city too, but during my time there, beside learning the police department was obviously useless and corrupt, to nearly escaping with my life multiple times, I couldn't be happier to be far, far away from there, and doing a lot better with my fear and anxiety. This happened about 4 years ago. For some backstory, I'm from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, lived in another country, but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city, which if you drove about an hour in any direction, would either lead into another city or deep into beautiful nature, at least in my opinion. My friends and I decided to take my girlfriend to see some of this beautiful nature area, and decided on a national park, about an hour and a half from where we currently lived. This place was definitely no sort of secret location. It was very well known, but there were a ton of different areas to it, all with different rural and windy roads taking you to the various different areas of the park. We'd gone in 2 separate cars, my friends in one and my girlfriend and I in another, in order to have some time together on the way there. We finished out the day of hiking and were heading down one of the less common roads. I remember seeing this really beat-up old 70s sedan, with a wild-looking dude in the driver's seat, drive past us in the other direction. This wasn't very uncommon. There were a lot of smaller, less economically sound towns spattered around the area, but for some reason, him and his particular car stood out, and my girlfriend noticed it as well. About 200 meters further down the windy road, there was a pull-off area. It was just sort of a semicircle of gravel you could pull off to look at the view towards the ocean. There was a camper van belonging to a company that mostly rented out colorful vans to backpackers, parked there with a woman standing in front of it. As soon as she saw us, she jumped out onto the road and flagged us down right away. Now, I've read enough of these subs to know pulling in to help her on a quiet road might not be the safest idea. But back then, I hadn't had those experiences yet. And besides, my friends were in the car directly behind us. Luckily though, she wasn't the type of person I wouldn't want to meet. She was quite obviously upset and very scared when we pulled in. I told my girlfriend to wait in the car, and got out to speak to her. She was completely in tears. I can't quite remember where she was from, but I believe it was a Central European country from my memory. She was touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter. She told me her van had broken down and she'd pulled off here. She'd called the van company's assistance line and was now waiting for help. By this time, my friends had pulled in behind us, and a couple of them had come over to see what was up. Apparently, while this woman had been waiting for help, a scary man had driven past her a few times already, the first time pulling over to offer to take her and her daughter to the nearest town for help. She'd thanked him and said no, and that she was waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left, but then kept driving past every 10 minutes in opposite directions, slowing down and looking at them before driving off. She begged us to stay with her while she waited for the assistance vehicle, because the guy terrified her so much, her and her daughter. I agreed readily, and my friends, being the awesome people they are, decided that my girlfriend and I were more than enough and ditched us right away. Thanks, guys. We stayed with the woman for a little while, before the car my girlfriend and I had seen earlier drove past slowly, coming the opposite way we'd seen him from the first time. As soon as he'd driven around the bend, the lady told us that was the scary man she'd been seeing from before we got there. This got my girlfriend and I to take her much more seriously after the feeling we'd gotten from that guy just seeing him on the road before. A few minutes later, he came back from the other direction and pulled into the parking area this time. For some more context, I'm not a very intimidating man. I'm tall, but I have basically zero muscle and fairly soft features, so there was really not much intimidating factor between me, a terrified foreign woman, her tiny daughter, and my small girlfriend, parked off on a quiet road in a rural location. Great. He gets out. He was redneck as hell and definitely not friendly looking. No judgment on the redneck part, by the way. I come from a poorer country town north of our city, and those are my type of people. So I'm just trying to set the picture. He struts over to us. At this point, I walk towards him and put myself between the girls and him. I have no idea where this particular bravery came from. I wouldn't describe myself as the hero type normally. He looked at the girls and then over at me and asked if he could help. I told him no. We were waiting for the assistance vehicle and told him we've got it covered now. He says maybe he can stay and wait with the woman and her daughter so we don't have to. I tell him we're more than happy to stay and thank him again. He just kind of stood there while staring at all of us, not really saying anything and giving off some mega creepy and angry vibes. After what seemed like forever, another car drove past us and looked out but kept going. This seemed to startle him a bit. He mumbled good luck and got in his car and drove off. We waited with this poor scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes. We ended up talking quite a lot, and hopefully we made her opinions of Australians a little bit better after that mega creep encounter. He even drove past a few more times after he'd left us that time. Finally though, the assistance vehicle arrived. It was a bigger dude who could definitely handle himself. I asked to see his ID and stuff just to be safe, but he was in a car marked by the company. He had all his tools and definitely was legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text me when she was off safe. She was so grateful to us for staying with her for such a long time. It made me feel good that even if this dude was just a weird, awkward country guy that didn't mean harm and was really trying to help, we had still made her feel more comfortable in a strange country she wasn't familiar with. I don't think he was a good guy though. I definitely believe he was up to no good. But since he never actually got the chance to try anything, I guess we'll never know. I did get a message from her to say she was safe, so thankfully everything ended well in the end. This took place 2 summers ago in the hometown of the Cowboys. Now I'm aware of human trafficking in this city. I actually had a coworker pulled out of work and put in a safe house by the FBI because she finally decided to rat on her family. However, I never thought they randomly snatched people. I mean, in all the stories, they always use drugs or coercion. So 2 summers ago, I'm cycling to a smoke shop. It's kinda out of my way and not in a great neighborhood, but I was fairly confident. It was daylight and I ride all over the city anyway and know the store very well. I was 24, short and had short pink hair as well. I had always considered myself a bit too intimidating to randomly kidnap. I forget that even if I'm a veteran, I'm also a short white girl as well. I pull up to a crosswalk and I'm waiting for a light when these 2 Hispanic guys start catcalling me from this windowless white van. No identification, no stickers. Even the way they yelled at me was weird. It wasn't the typical nice tits or her, let me fuck you locker room bullshit. They would talk to each other and then yell through a cracked window about how we're gonna get you and you're next. It felt off like they were very excited, but I just flipped them both off and rode away. End of the story, right? Over a mile later, I'm right around the block from my destination. To set it up, there was this massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots together, on my right. That was the side I was riding down. To my left, there was a back fence of a very, very old and probably abandoned house. It was like that all around. Mostly drifters and old people in poverty around there. A few trap houses as well. The point is, there was no one else visible, and even if they had seen this, they probably wouldn't have said anything for their own safety. I'm pedaling along when the album ends, and I think, I'm almost there, I'm not gonna stop and fumble with my phone. This saved my life. As I'm thinking this, a white van pulls up on my left and stays right inside my peripheral. They revved the engine a few times and tried to spook me, but something told me not to move. Don't let them know you know. So I acted like my music was still playing and pedaled on a little bit faster. Up ahead of me was a brick wall to my left and a tall tree over it before a quick alley entrance. Suddenly, they punched the gas and pulled up right in front of me, stopping next to that brick wall. They were trying to corner or funnel me, putting me in a position where I had to ride between their door and the wall. This happened in the span of maybe 7 seconds. I honestly didn't panic though. I didn't actively register any fear or sweat or anything. It was like someone much calmer took over my body and instantly said, nope. I remember crossing the street right away, without even thinking about my movements or even why I was doing it. As I pedaled up their other side, I realized this was the same van from before, and now it had a window repair magnet on the side. It was too small to look good and had absolutely no contact info, just a generic name. I kept rubbernecking and saw there was no one in the front, but there was movement behind the seats. The guys were in the back waiting by the door. They had planned to literally drag me off my bike off the street and do God knows what to me. Once I was past, they scrambled into the front seat and pulled out so hard they burnt rubber. I got to the store safe and sound, but I still hate myself for not taking down the plate number. Not that it would do any good, of course. They probably switched them out later. I knew I had almost been kidnapped or killed or worse, but it wasn't until I told the story to someone from Mexico that I found out it was traffickers. They said it sounded sadly familiar and happens all the time. I have no family and my roommates are just roommates. I would have been gone for 3 to 7 days before anyone decided something was wrong. Even then, they would have just known I left on my bike and vanished. I would have been across the border or dead before anyone even knew I was gone. Some backstory. My parents split when I was about 14. It wasn't a good breakup either. My dad was an abusive drug addict, so when my mom left him, she was in a really bad place. Her, my older sister, my sister was in her 20s and in full-blown party mode at the time, kept taking her to local bars since my mom was very depressed. This led my mom to becoming a full-on alcoholic since my sister was well on her way to becoming one too. During one of these nights, she met a new guy. I didn't really know much about him, just that they met him and his brother at a bar, and now she was suddenly dating him. It went pretty fast. My sister would flirt with the brother to get free food and drinks from him. Around this time, I was 15, and I could just tell this dude seemed off. He was probably in his early 40s or so, and he was always going on my mom's dates with his brother. He just kinda hung around them a lot. One day, my sister decided she wanted sushi and called the brother up to take us because she knew he would pay. I didn't want to go, but we didn't have food in the house and I was extremely hungry. We didn't have a sushi place in our town though, so we had to drive to the city, which was about 30 minutes away. The entire ride there, I just had this warning feeling in my stomach that kept telling me to get out of the car, that this was a bad idea. I was a giant ball of anxiety the whole 30 minutes. My sister sat in the front seat completely oblivious to what was happening. Meanwhile, I kept catching him staring at me in the rear-view mirror. Once we got to the restaurant, he sat himself directly across from me. He wanted to sit next to me, but I rushed to sit next to my sister instead. It was really awkward, but my sister talked a lot, so I was able to kinda hide myself away. Eventually though, she got up to go to the bathroom, and then I was all alone with him. Almost immediately, he asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I said no. "That's good," he said. "You're too good for high school boys. They're only after one thing." I just nodded, not really knowing how to respond. He then went on to ask if I liked Disneyland, and I said yes. He got very excited and went on about how he would take me, but hotels were very expensive, so we'd have to share a room together. It would be just us, so my mom and his brother could have their alone time. He said my sister couldn't come either, because he couldn't afford to pay for both of us to go. At this point, I was extremely uncomfortable, and I just wanted my sister to come back. Finally, she did, and he switched to talking to her like nothing had ever happened. She didn't even notice that anything was wrong, or that he kept on staring at me. Once we finished, he took us home and invited himself in. At this point, I went to my room right away and locked the door and hid myself. At one point, he tried to open my door, but stopped once he felt it was locked. My mom and her boyfriend came home around then. I tried talking to my sister, but she brushed me off almost immediately. They had invited us back to their house, and I wanted so badly to stay home, but they forced me to go. Almost immediately, my mom and her boyfriend went to the room and left my sister and I with his brother. He got my sister drunk pretty fast and tried to get me to drink too, but I kept refusing. It got to the point where my sister was almost blackout drunk. I was freaking out because once she finally passed out, it would be just me and him. I started frantically texting my brothers, hoping one of them would come pick me up. Thank God my oldest brother responded. I told him what was happening, and he came to get me pretty fast. He showed up and told the guy that it was very late and I had to go to school, so he was going to take me home now. He tried to protest, but my brother was very firm about it. He loaded my sister in the car, texted my mom he was taking us home, and then we left. My brother didn't live with us since he was about 30 at the time and had his own family, so he really didn't know what was going on. I told him the full story of everything that was happening in my life. He got real quiet and then waited till my mom got home. He told her off, ashamed of her for putting me in that situation, and told her that if it continued at all, he would move me into his house instead. My mom broke down then and told him she wanted to break up with her boyfriend because of his brother. I found out when I was older that he would sneak by the door to listen to them when they had sex. I think more happened as well, but my mom never talked about it more than that. She broke up with him, got a good job, and sobered up with the help of my brother. It took my sister a lot longer, but eventually she got her life together too.